Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform for the third time that morning, but because apparently looking good while being insufferably cocky required constant maintenance. Everyone aboard the intergalactic peacekeeping vessel Diplomatic Immunity knew Jake by his callsign Hotshot, though behind his back the crew had some far less flattering nicknames. The man had an ego so massive it probably had its own gravitational pull. "Morning, Luna," Jake announced as he strutted into the communications bay, his voice dripping with the kind of forced cheer that made everyone want to chuck him out an airlock. "Ready for another day of sitting safely behind your desk while the real soldiers handle the dangerous stuff?" Captain Luna Reeves looked up from her console, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She wore the standard communications officer uniform, complete with about 17 different technical badges that Jake had never bothered to learn the meaning of. To him, she was just the quiet bookworm who handled radio chatter and diplomatic translations. "Good morning, Jake," Luna replied with the patience of someone who'd clearly dealt with difficult personalities before. "I see you're in your usual charming mood." The Diplomatic Immunity housed one of the most diverse crews in the galaxy. There was Corax, a 7-foot-tall reptilian draconian who served as security chief and spoke in a gravelly voice that could make a battle cruiser's engines sound melodic. The engineering department was run by Pip, a 4-armed quintarian whose species was known for their technical brilliance and their unfortunate tendency to explode when startled. Dr. Vex, the ship's medic, belonged to a species that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a philosophy professor, complete with multiple eyes that seemed to see everything and judge it accordingly. "You know what I love about this job?" Jake continued, apparently unaware that nobody had asked. "Real combat experience. Not like some people who think reading tactical manuals counts as military training." Luna's fingers paused over her keyboard for just a moment. Around the communications bay, several alien crew members exchanged glances that could best be described as, "Oh boy, here we go again." But Luna just smiled politely and returned to her work. During the daily combat drills, Jake made it his personal mission to point out Luna's absence from the training sessions. He'd make loud comments about how some people preferred the safety of their offices while real warriors put their lives on the line. The fact that communications officers had different training requirements seemed to escape his comprehension entirely. "Hey Luna," Jake called out during one particularly obnoxious display, "maybe you should join us sometime. Learn what actual combat looks like instead of just coordinating it from your safe little bubble." Corax, who was adjusting his weapon harness nearby, made a sound that might have been a chuckle or possibly indigestion. "Human Jake," he rumbled in his gravelly voice, "perhaps you should focus on your own performance first." But Jake was on a roll now, his voice getting louder as more crew members gathered. "I mean, no offense, Luna, but when push comes to shove, knowing 17 different alien languages isn't going to save you in a firefight. Some of us have actually seen real action." Luna continued working at her station, her expression as calm as still water. But anyone paying attention might have noticed that her typing had become very, very precise. The kind of precise that suggested someone was counting to 10. Or maybe to 100. The breaking point came during the weekly staff meeting when Jake decided to share his opinions about combat readiness with the entire senior staff. "I'm just saying," Jake announced to the assembled officers, his voice carrying that special tone that meant he was about to say something spectacularly stupid. "Maybe we should reconsider having non-combat personnel in critical positions during dangerous missions." Captain Torres, a weathered human woman who'd been commanding starships since before Jake learned to tie his shoes, raised an eyebrow. "Are you questioning my crew assignments, Commander Morrison?" "Not questioning, Captain. Just suggesting that when lives are on the line, we might want people who actually know which end of a plasma rifle to point at the enemy." Jake's gaze slid meaningfully toward Luna, who was quietly taking notes at the far end of the conference table. The alien officers began displaying what could generously be called body language. Corax's tail started twitching, which in draconian culture meant someone was about to witness something entertaining. Pip's forearms started fidgeting with different tools, a sure sign that the Quintarian was excited. Dr. Vex's compound eyes focused on Jake with the intensity of someone watching a particularly fascinating specimen. For instance, Jake continued, because apparently he hadn't dug his hole deep enough yet. Captain Reeves here is brilliant with communications, don't get me wrong. But in a real combat situation, knowing how to say please don't shoot in 12 different languages isn't exactly what I'd call a tactical advantage. Luna looked up from her notes, her expression still perfectly pleasant. 17 languages, actually. See? Exactly my point. Very impressive for a desk job, but... Jake, Luna interrupted softly, and something in her tone made the entire room go quiet. I have a question for you. Jake puffed up like a peacock at what he clearly thought was going to be an admission of defeat. Sure, Luna. Fire away. Luna set down her stylus with deliberate care and looked directly at him. Do you prefer the quiet lesson or the messy one? The room got so silent you could have heard a pin drop on a planet 3 star systems away. Jake blinked, clearly not understanding the question but unwilling to admit it. I'm sorry, what? It's a simple question, Jake. The quiet lesson, where I explain things calmly and you listen respectfully. Or the messy one, where I demonstrate why your assumptions might be a tiny bit off target. Luna's smile was perfectly friendly, but somehow it made several crew members unconsciously step back. Jake looked around the room, saw all eyes on him, and made the mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his natural life. He laughed. Oh, this is rich. You're challenging me. To what, a spelling bee? Combat demonstration, Luna said simply. Holographic arena. Standard rules. Winner takes all. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Unless you'd prefer the quiet lesson? Jake's ego had taken control of his vocal cords at this point. Fine, you know what? Fine. But when this is over, maybe you'll understand why combat training actually matters. Excellent, Luna said, making a note in her tablet. Arena 7 in 1 hour. Oh, and Jake? Yeah? The stakes. Loser handles the winner's duties for a month. Captain Torres cleared her throat. If you're both serious about this, I'll make it official. But Commander Morrison, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? Jake was already mentally planning his victory speech. Captain, with all due respect, this won't take long. Around the room, the alien crew members began what could only be described as the interstellar equivalent of placing bets. Korax pulled out what looked like a small gambling device. Pip started chattering excitedly in rapid Quintarian. Dr. Vex tilted his head in that way that meant he was calculating probability matrices. 1 hour then, Captain Torres said. Dismissed. Me. As the crew filed out, Jake started holding court with anyone who'd listen, describing exactly how he planned to teach Luna a lesson about the difference between theory and practice. Meanwhile, Luna gathered her things quietly and headed toward the door. Luna called Ensign Park, one of the newer human crew members. Are you really going to fight Hotshot? Luna paused at the doorway and looked back with that same pleasant smile. Fight? Oh no, Ensign Park. I'm going to educate him. Arena 7 was the Diplomatic Immunity's premier holographic combat facility, capable of simulating everything from medieval battlefields to alien jungle warfare. The technology was so advanced it could replicate gravity variations, atmospheric conditions, and even the smell of plasma fire. Today it hummed with anticipation as crew members filed in to witness what promised to be either the shortest combat demonstration in ship history or the most educational. Jake arrived 15 minutes early, because apparently being fashionably punctual was part of his whole insufferable package. He'd traded his dress uniform for full tactical gear, complete with impact padding, weapon harnesses, and boots that probably cost more than most crew members made in a month. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster, assuming the poster was advertising for people with more confidence than common sense. "Looking good, Commander," called out Ensign Williams from the observation deck. Whether this was meant as encouragement or sarcasm was open to interpretation. Jake waved to his audience with the casual confidence of someone who'd never experienced genuine humility. The arena's observation area was packed with practically the entire off-duty crew, representing about 12 different species and apparently 17 different ways to express anticipation. The betting had reached astronomical proportions, with odds that would have impressed professional gamblers across 3 star systems. Luna arrived precisely on time, which somehow felt ominous. She wore standard workout attire, soft-soled training shoes, and had tied her hair back in a practical braid. No padding, no fancy gear, no weapons harnesses. She looked like she was heading to a casual gym session rather than a combat demonstration. "Seriously?" Jake called out, his voice echoing in the arena space. "That's your combat gear?" "I prefer to stay mobile," Luna replied, stretching her arms above her head in a movement that looked casual but had several martial arts experts in the audience sitting up straighter. "Your funeral," Jake muttered, then louder. "So what's it going to be? Urban warfare? Jungle combat? Zero-G environment?" Luna walked to the environmental controls and made her selection. The arena shimmered and transformed into a basic Earth military training ground, complete with obstacle courses, practice walls, and sandy ground. Nothing fancy, nothing exotic, just a straightforward environment that emphasized skill over environmental advantages. "Really?" Jake shook his head in disbelief. "You had access to alien combat scenarios and you chose basic training?" "I'm old-fashioned that way." Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom system. "Arena 7 is live and recording. Standard non-lethal combat protocols are in effect. Fighters, you may begin when ready." Jake immediately launched into what could generously be called an attack and, more accurately described as an enthusiastic display of everything wrong with learning martial arts from action movies. He came in fast and aggressive, throwing combinations that looked impressive and would have been devastating against an opponent who planned to stand still and cooperate with getting hit. Luna, however, seemed to have missed the memo about cooperating. She moved with an economy of motion that made Jake's flashy techniques look like someone having a seizure in fast forward. Every punch he threw seemed to find empty air. Every kick met nothing but space where Luna had been a split second earlier. "Stand still and fight." Jake grunted, throwing a combination that would have looked great in a choreographed movie fight. "I am fighting," Luna replied, her breathing barely elevated as she slipped another wild swing. "You're just not hitting anything." From the observation deck came sounds that might have been cheering, might have been commentary, and in at least one case was definitely Pip making what passed for popcorn in Quintarian culture. Jake's strategy seemed to involve using more force and flashier moves, apparently operating under the theory that if something wasn't working, doing it harder would fix the problem. He attempted a spinning kick that would have been impressive if it had connected with anything other than air molecules. Luna ducked under the kick so smoothly it looked like she'd choreographed the whole thing. To the casual observer, it might have appeared that Jake was winning, since Luna seemed to be spending all her time moving backward and avoiding contact. But anyone with actual combat experience would have noticed something else entirely. Every time Luna retreated, she ended up in a better tactical position. Every step backward was measured, calculated, purposeful. She wasn't running from Jake's attacks, she was studying them, cataloging every tell, every habit, every weakness in his technique. "Getting tired already?" Jake taunted between gasps for air. Luna tilted her head slightly, like someone considering an interesting academic question. "Actually, Jake, I was just wondering something." "Yeah? What's that?" "Did you want to reconsider the quiet lesson option? Because I'm still willing to explain this verbally if you prefer." Jake's response was another wild combination that might have looked impressive to someone who'd never seen actual combat. Luna avoided it with the same casual ease she might have used to step around a puddle. Up in the observation deck, Korax leaned over to Dr. Vex. "How long do you think she'll let this continue?" Dr. Vex's compound eyes tracked Luna's movements with scientific precision. "She's learning his patterns. I estimate another 90 seconds before she decides the demonstration has been adequately educational." They were off by about 60 seconds. The moment Luna switched from defense to offense was so subtle that half the audience missed it. 1 second she was flowing backward away from Jake's increasingly desperate attacks, and the next second Jake was on the ground, wondering how he'd gotten there and why his arm was making that interesting tingling sensation. What the hell? Jake scrambled to his feet, shaking his head like someone trying to clear away cobwebs. "Joint manipulation," Luna explained helpfully, bouncing lightly on the balls of her feet. "You telegraphed that right hook about 3 moves ahead. Very predictable." Jake's confusion was understandable, considering he'd gone from feeling completely dominant to eating sand in approximately 2 seconds. But his pride was stronger than his common sense, so instead of taking the hint, he charged again. This time Luna didn't just avoid his attack, she redirected it. Jake found himself stumbling past her, but his own momentum carrying him face first into one of the training barriers with a sound that made everyone in the observation deck wince sympathetically. "Momentum redirection," Luna continued conversationally, as if she were teaching a class. "Basic physics, really. Why fight force when you can redirect it?" Jake wiped blood from his nose and glared at her with the expression of someone whose worldview was crumbling in real time. "You got lucky." "Twice?" "Beginner's luck doesn't last forever." Luna's smile was absolutely radiant. "You know what, Jake? You're absolutely right. Beginner's luck doesn't last forever." What happened next could only be described as a master class in why assumptions are dangerous. Luna moved like water, like smoke, like something that belonged in a completely different category than whatever Jake had been attempting. She demonstrated techniques from at least 6 different martial arts disciplines, flowing from one to another so seamlessly it looked like she'd invented her own hybrid fighting style. Jake tried to grab her and found himself in a throw that sent him sliding across the sandy ground. He attempted a tackle and discovered that Luna could apparently dodge by moving in directions that shouldn't have been physically possible. When he tried to corner her against the training barriers, she used the walls like stepping stones, moving in 3 dimensions while Jake was still figuring out 2. "This is impossible," Jake gasped, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Not impossible," Luna replied, landing lightly after what could only be described as a wall-walking maneuver. "Just outside your experience." Up in the observation deck, the betting had stopped entirely because everyone was too fascinated to care about money. Pip was taking notes with all 4 arms simultaneously. Korax had leaned forward in his seat with the intensity of someone watching a master at work. Dr. Vex was calculating something on a tablet and making small sounds of scientific appreciation. Human Luna displays 17 different combat methodologies, Dr. Vex announced to no one in particular. Statistical probability of acquiring such skills through recreational training approaches 0. Jake made one final desperate attempt at victory, throwing everything he had into a combination attack that would have impressed martial arts instructors across the galaxy. Unfortunately for Jake, Luna had apparently been waiting for him to get serious. She moved inside his guard so smoothly it looked like she'd teleported. One moment Jake was throwing his best techniques, and the next moment he was suspended in midair, completely helpless, held in a submission hold that involved pressure points he didn't know he had. "Yield," Luna said quietly. "Never." Luna adjusted her grip slightly, and Jake made a sound that wasn't quite a scream but definitely wasn't voluntary. "I said yield, Jake." I yield. I yield." Luna released him immediately, stepping back as Jake collapsed to his hands and knees, breathing hard and trying to figure out what had just happened to his reality. "So," Luna said, dusting sand off her workout clothes, "would you like that quiet lesson now?" The arena went so quiet you could have heard a Quintarian's thought process, which was notoriously silent. Jake remained on his hands and knees, staring at the sandy ground like it might contain answers to questions he hadn't known he needed to ask. Luna stood a few feet away, looking like someone who'd just finished a light warm-up rather than dismantling a man's entire sense of self-worth. I think Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom with the tone of someone trying not to laugh. Some explanations might be in order. Luna walked over to help Jake to his feet, which he accepted with the numb confusion of someone whose brain was still catching up to recent events. "Jake, I'd like you to meet Captain Luna Reeves, formerly Gunnery Sergeant Luna Reeves, Earth Special Forces, retired." "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "Korax?" Luna called to the observation deck. "Would you mind sharing what you know about my service record?" The massive Draconian stood up, his gravelly voice carrying easily across the arena. "Captain Reeves, callsign Ghost, served 8 years in Earth's most classified military operations, 17 confirmed solo missions behind enemy lines, expert marksman rating in 14 different weapon systems, close quarters combat instructor certification. The Draconian Military Academy studied her infiltration techniques for 3 years. Jake's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. He looked like someone trying to process information that didn't fit into any category his brain had available. "Pip?" Luna continued. The 4-armed engineer practically vibrated with excitement. Oh, Captain Luna designed the stealth modifications for 3 different classes of military vessels. Her technical specifications are still classified at the highest levels of Quintarian intelligence. "Dr. Vex?" The insectoid medic tilted his head with scientific precision. "Captain Reeves's psychological warfare techniques are referenced in 17 different species military manuals. Her ability to analyze and exploit opponent behavioral patterns is considered a textbook case study in tactical psychology." Jake looked around the arena like someone trapped in a nightmare where everyone else knew the punchline to a joke he'd never heard. But you're a communications officer." "I am now," Luna agreed. "After 8 years of classified operations, I wanted a nice, quiet job where I could use my language skills and technical background without people shooting at me on a regular basis. But the desk work, the translations, the peaceful career I chose after spending nearly a decade in situations where a single mistake meant death." Luna's voice was still perfectly pleasant, but something in it made Jake take an unconscious step backward. "The diplomatic work I genuinely enjoy because it involves solving problems with words instead of weapons." Jake stared at her with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was reorganizing itself in real time. "You let me think you were just a..." "Just a what, Jake? Just a communications officer? Just someone who prefers words to violence? Just a woman who wears glasses and keeps to herself?" Luna's smile was still friendly, but it had acquired a certain edge. "I never lied to you about anything. I never claimed to be helpless. I never asked for your protection or your condescension. You just assumed." The arena was so silent that the environmental system seemed loud by comparison. Jake opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I don't understand." "The quiet lesson, Jake. The one you should have chosen." Luna walked over to lean against one of the training barriers, completely relaxed, despite having just redefined several laws of physics. "It goes like this. When you meet someone new, particularly someone who's different from you, making assumptions about their capabilities based on their appearance, their job, or their personality is not just stupid, it's dangerous." Jake was still staring at her like she'd just revealed she was an alien in disguise. "But you never said anything. You never corrected me." Because I shouldn't have had to. Because my value as a crew member doesn't depend on your approval of my background. Because thinking that everyone needs to prove themselves to you is exactly the kind of arrogance that just got you schooled in front of the entire ship. From the observation deck came what sounded suspiciously like applause, though with 12 different species represented, it was hard to tell exactly what some of the sounds were supposed to indicate. Captain Torres's voice returned to the intercom. Commander Morrison, I believe you have some duties to attend to. Captain Reeves's duties, to be specific, for the next month. Jake looked around the arena one more time, taking in the faces of the crew members who'd watched him get comprehensively educated. His shoulders sagged as the full weight of his situation settled in. Luna, Captain Reeves, I. The quiet lesson isn't over yet, Jake, Luna said gently. But the first part is complete. Any questions so far? Jake shook his head mutely. Good. Now, shall we discuss your new responsibilities? 3 weeks into his sentence of handling Luna's duties, Jake had developed what could charitably be called a new perspective on life. Managing communications for an intergalactic peacekeeping vessel, it turned out, required skills he'd never imagined, like patience and humility, and the ability to admit when you didn't understand something instead of pretending you knew everything. Translation request coming in from the Zentorian delegation, Jake announced from Luna's former workstation, where he now spent his days learning exactly how much work went into making interspecies communication look easy. They want to know if our previous diplomatic solution can be modified for their territorial dispute. Luna, who was temporarily filling Jake's patrol duties with the casual competence of someone who'd probably forgotten more about security than most people ever learned, glanced over at his station. Check the cultural context database. Zentorians use a completely different conceptual framework for territory than most species. Right. Cultural context. Jake started typing, then stopped. Luna? Luna. How do you keep track of 17 different languages plus all their cultural variations plus all the technical specifications plus all the diplomatic protocols plus everything else? Luna finished adjusting her security patrol route and walked over to his station. Practice, patience, and the understanding that every single piece of information might be the difference between peaceful resolution and interstellar incident. I used to think this job was just talking on the radio. I know you did. Jake had been having a lot of conversations like this over the past few weeks. Conversations where he said something that revealed the depth of his previous ignorance, and Luna responded with the patience of someone teaching a particularly slow student. The rest of the crew had stopped making jokes about the situation after the first week, but partly because Jake was clearly trying to learn and partly because watching someone's entire personality reorganize itself was more educational than entertaining. Jake, Luna said, settling into her temporary security station, can I ask you something? After what I've put you through? Ask anything. Why was it so important for you to believe I was helpless? Jake stopped typing and considered the question seriously, which was something he'd been doing a lot more lately. I don't know if I thought you were helpless exactly. I guess I needed to feel important. Like I was the one with the real skills, the one who mattered? And now I realize that everyone on this ship has skills I don't understand and couldn't do myself, including you. Especially you. Jake turned to face her directly. Luna, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a fundamental change in how I see the world. You don't owe me anything, Jake, but you might owe it to yourself to figure out why you needed other people to be less capable in order for you to feel valuable. Before Jake could respond, Ensign Park's voice came over the intercom. All senior staff to conference room Alpha. We have a situation. The situation, as it turned out, involved a new crew member, Lieutenant Commander Rex Sterling, who'd just been assigned to the ship and was currently holding court in the conference room with opinions about how things should be run. Jake and Luna arrived to find the man in full lecture mode, What I'm saying is, some positions require a certain type of person. Sterling was explaining to Captain Torres with the confidence of someone who'd clearly never been catastrophically wrong about anything. Take security, for instance. You need someone with real combat experience, not someone who looks like they belong in a library. Sterling's gaze landed on Dr. Vex with obvious dismissal. No offense to the medical staff, but in a crisis situation you want warriors, not scientists. Jake and Luna exchanged glances. Around the conference table, the crew members who'd witnessed Jake's educational experience 3 weeks earlier were displaying various expressions that ranged from anticipation to barely suppressed hilarity. "Lieutenant Commander Sterling," Captain Torres said with the tone of someone trying to prevent a massacre, "Dr. Vex is our chief medical officer, and also happens to be a scientist," Sterling interrupted. "Which is fine for medical work, but let's be realistic about combat capabilities." Dr. Vex tilted his compound head with interest. "Lieutenant Commander Sterling, I have a question for you." "Sure, Doc. Fire away." "Do you prefer the quiet lesson or the messy one?" The conference room went so quiet that the ship's engines sounded like thunder. Sterling looked around the table with the expression of someone who'd just heard a phrase he didn't understand but was pretty sure it wasn't good news. Jake cleared his throat. "Sterling? Take the quiet lesson. Trust me on this one." "What are you talking about?" Luna leaned back in her chair with a smile that was becoming familiar to the crew. "He's talking about assumptions, Lieutenant Commander Sterling, and the educational opportunities that come with making them." Sterling looked around the table, saw the expressions of barely contained anticipation, and for the first time since arriving, he seemed to grasp that he might have missed something important. "Quiet lesson," he said quickly. "Definitely the quiet lesson." Jake nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. Dr. Vex, would you like to do the honors?" As Dr. Vex began explaining his background in tactical medicine, psychological warfare, and his species' rather impressive combat capabilities, Jake turned to Luna with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "What?" "For teaching me that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about the people around us." Luna smiled, the real one this time, not the politely patient one she'd been using for weeks. "You're welcome, Jake. But the lesson isn't over yet." "No?" "Nast. Nay. No. The best part of learning how wrong you can be is discovering how much more interesting the world becomes when you stop pretending you understand everything." Jake listened to Dr. Vex's quiet lesson and realized that Luna was right. Again, the universe was a much more fascinating place when you admitted you didn't know everything about it. Especially the people in it. And that, he thought, was the most human thing of all. The ability to surprise each other, to exceed expectations, to reveal depths that no one had suspected. Humans, it turned out, were very good at being underestimated. Right up until they weren't.